Today on LA Currents. Tackling one of the biggest, if not the biggest issue in the city, the new CEO of LASA, LA Homeless Service Authority, Dr. Lecia Adams Kellum, comes to the job with a determination to provide the support needed to get folks off the streets and into permanent housing. Next, appointed LA City Poet Laureate during a time of remarkable uncertainty, Lynne Thompson shares her thoughts about the moments of challenge and the moments of genuine pride during her tenure. But to start, a personal awareness of community needs led Traci Park to take to the streets and successfully lead a grassroots campaign that won her a seat at the LA City Council. Well, after a successful 20-year career in law, she decided to focus her attention on public service. I'm delighted today to be joined by Councilwoman Traci Park from District 11. So nice to have you here.
Maria, thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here.
Good. Okay, you don't exactly have a traditional background in politics, so what prompted your decision to throw your hat in the ring to be a council member?
You know, I had been a practicing attorney here in Los Angeles for more than 20 years. And running for office is not something that I ever imagined that I was going to do. But as a resident of Venice, I had a front row seat to the humanitarian crisis unfolding in our community. And so after giving it some thought, I decided that with my background and my skill set, that this was something that I thought I could do and maybe even be good at. And I recognized that my community was asking for my help and that I needed to step up and answer that call. And so that's what prompted me into the race.
And also, as you mentioned, being a resident of Venice, what are some of the things that you immediately saw that needed to be addressed? What are some of the things that really stood out to you? And obviously some of them are quite apparent.
Yeah, well, in Venice, we have the highest concentration of unhoused individuals anywhere in the city outside of Skid Row. Over the last several years, we had seen a very concerning uptick in the level of crime. Our business community had been hard hit by the pandemic. And Venice is the #1 tourist destination in all of Los Angeles. And yet our local businesses were holding on by a thread. But a lot of other things as well. We are obviously the coastal district, and a lot of concerns about protecting and preserving our ocean and our coastline. A significant part of my district is in our high fire severity zones, and there is a lot of concern there about fire season and what can be done to ensure that we have adequate resources at the fire department and good ingress and egress evacuation routes and fire preparedness. And so those were a lot of the things that were going on in the background that I was aware of and recognized that I might be able to help make some improvements.
What have you learned about the homeless problem in District 11 that might be somewhat surprising to other people?
During my campaign, I spent a lot of time in encampments talking to unhoused individuals because I felt like, as a policymaker, it's really important for me to understand what has worked for people, what hasn't worked, what their stories are. I heard oftentimes from older folks living on the streets that they didn't want to go into housing with youth. And yet we have no transitional housing online in the city that is exclusive to seniors 55 and up. I looked at different types of housing strategies and models that were out there. And for young people who are aging out of foster care, which is one of the largest feeders into homelessness for youth, we don't have a variety of shared housing models, which is great for that demographic where you can have built-in community and education and employment programming. Women who are victims of domestic violence require a different kind of environment and supportive services than other folks living on the street. Obviously, families with children have very different needs. And I think one of the issues that government generally has created for itself is putting a lot of regulatory barriers around the type of housing that we're building and how people coming into housing are vetted. And I think we have just got to kick some of that out of the way so that we have more flexibility in designing specific strategies for interventions for specific demographics. And I'm very hopeful that with the mayor's partnership and her leadership through her Inside Safe initiative and the collaborative work that she's doing with our state, federal, and county partners, that we'll be able to clear some of that out of the way. And I am cautiously optimistic that we might actually begin to see some progress here.
And you are the chair of the Trade, Travel, and Tourism Committee. There are a lot of big things coming to Los Angeles in the next few years. What is your strategy and how are you hoping to implement it?
So I couldn't be more thrilled to be chairing Trade, Travel, and Tourism. For me, economic development is a passion subject. So we have huge events coming with the World Cup and the Olympics and many other things. And this is a real opportunity to showcase our city. And that means building out our modernized transportation systems, making sure our city is connected. And for me, with LAX in my district, which is the entry point for tens of millions of visitors every year, I see a tremendous amount of opportunity to do workforce development, investment in infrastructure and transportation, modernizing our city. As to infrastructure generally, you know, we have pipes under our city that are 100 years or more old in some places, and those are environmental disasters waiting to happen all of the time. We have bridges that are in need of repair. We have other plumbing that is in need of repair. We have an electrical grid that we are trying to get modernized and switch to 100% renewables. As we make those investments in infrastructure, not only are we creating a more modern, sustainable city, we are investing in good jobs and creating a built environment that makes this city more livable for everyone. So those projects check a lot of boxes for me too.
And all the dynamics of the West Side, you did, we've gone through a bit of the crisis issues and some of the, potential promise, but there's also, you mentioned the environment. So what are your main concerns or main hopes when it comes to the environment of District 11?
Yeah, so it is an environmentally rich district. We have our beautiful Ballona wetlands in the southern end of the district. This is an area that activists for decades fought to preserve. Those are threatened by overdevelopment. We've seen a lot of environmental degradation happen there over the last few years. Obviously, our gorgeous ocean and coastline. And, to me personally, it is heartbreaking after a storm to see the amount of garbage and the pollution that flows into our ocean and washes up on our beaches. We, in the last several months, installed the trash interceptor at the base of the Ballona Creek. It looks a little bit like a boat, and it floats right in the base of the Ballona Creek, and it has sort of a net system that catches trash and then moves it up a ramp onto the device, and then it's disposed of properly on the other end. And it prevents all of that debris from going into our ocean. So investments like those upstream all over the city and the county and beyond are things that I want to see.
Has this experience been a surprise or a joy or a challenge or all of it?
All of it.
All of it?
All of it, yeah, It has been just so much so fast. And we had such a short runway between when the election was called and when I took office to hire staff and to build the team and, understanding the legislative process, getting familiar with the various departments and functions has been an education for me. I feel really good about where we are. We've hit the ground running. I am already seeing and feeling the difference all over my district. And the outpouring of support and gratitude that we have had from our constituents on the West Side has made it all worth it.
So if people wanted to get more information about what you're doing or even share what they want to tell you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So the best thing to do would be to go to our new CD11 website. That is councildistrict11.lacity.gov. You can sign up to receive my weekly newsletters We push out a lot of information about big developments at City Hall, pieces of legislation, events that are happening in the district, information that people need to know. We send those out on Saturdays, and so that's a really great way to stay in touch. Following me on social media at Councilwoman Traci Park on Facebook and Instagram is a good way to stay in touch too. And all of our staff contact information is up on our website.
Well, congratulations and best of everything moving forward. And I hope you'll come back for multiple updates as time progresses.
Thank you, Maria. I'm looking forward to it.
Growing up in an environment of giving back, Dr. Lecia Adams Kellum talks with Ann Police about how tackling the complex issues of homelessness requires knowledge, support, and cooperation.
Our next guest is dedicated to transforming the streets of Los Angeles through ending homelessness. Dr. Lecia Adams Kellum is the incoming CEO of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. Welcome, Dr. Lecia. We're glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
You've been the president and CEO of social services organization St. Joseph Center, and you are recognized as an expert, as a leader in homeless services throughout Los Angeles. What led you originally to work with the homeless?
I really have to go back to the beginning. I have family members who are really dedicated to volunteerism and community service. My dad was always making meals for folks in the community, and I just always had a heart for people who were less fortunate. And that eventually became the folks around me and in my universe who were unhoused. Started really after graduate school of working with kids who were coming out of foster care, many of which were finding themselves unhoused after emancipation. And after that, I started at St. Joseph Center 15 years ago. Honestly, it's been really sad to see the erosion of our community, the growing number of people who can't afford rent and to have a home that they feel safe in. And it's quite sad to see what's happened to our community. So it has definitely inspired me to want to do something and to make a difference and have an impact on this crushing crisis.
You helped lead the Inside Safe program. Explain a little bit more about what the Inside Safe program is.
Well, it's the mayor's program that I helped develop that's really focusing on the crisis of encampments that are on the streets of Los Angeles. And we've all seen them proliferate over the last few years, particularly during COVID. And we are leaning into that crisis, connecting with people in those very chronic encampments throughout the city, engaging people, inspiring them to, one, say yes to housing now, and also to a future connection and resource that will help them connect to permanent housing. And we believe that it's not just about moving in and saying, hey, we have a motel bed tonight. It's about a life change that's promised. It's about a future opportunity to get indoors for good, inside safe.
So how many people approximately, as of this taping, have you moved off the streets through the Inside Safe program?
About 356.
And so they've gone from outdoor encampments to motels?
To motels, and some of them into permanency. We have over 25 or so who are actually in permanent housing as of today.
So there are people out on the street, social worker type of people, helping the unhoused and offering them this, a stay in a motel, telling them what the parameters are of the Inside Safe program? How does that work?
Yes, it's a great question. So we start off by really canvassing the encampment and connecting with people, determining their interest in coming indoors, and most say yes, I will tell you that. And then we determine what level of support and services folks will need. We set up a zone-by-zone approach, especially if we are tackling several streets at a time. And we let folks know that we have resources and that we're going to support them. Then what we call our multidisciplinary teams go out and connect with people one by one really connecting with their needs. We have nurses on those teams, people with alcohol and drug addiction training and experience, folks with lived experience as well. And so that very diverse team, often of experts, of people who've lived in encampments and been unhoused themselves, really connect on a heart-to-heart level and inspire people to say yes. So that canvassing and connection happens. But it's important for folks to know that we're not going out into those encampments initially, for the first time without knowing folks there. We are led by service providers that have been in those encampments over months, sometimes over years. And so they're coming in, offering support. They're known to the people generally in those encampments, and most of them have said yes.
That's inspirational right there. The years-long work that it takes in order to help someone, I think that sometimes goes unseen, For the folks who do say yes to the Inside Safe recipients, they find themselves housed for a temporary amount of time. Approximately how long is that stay?
Well, we know that it's taking upwards of 6 months often to connect someone who's unhoused to a permanent housing resource. So that's how long we sense that people will be in interim, we call interim housing, or the motel stays. Some have been much shorter. As I said, there are about 20 or so, 25 folks who are in permanent housing, and that was for them just 3 or 4 weeks in interim housing before being permanently housed.
That's amazing. How did they get from, do you offer services then once they are in the motel? I assume there's follow-up services saying, here are some other options that can help you be permanently housed.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really part of our promise, that this isn't just about a motel stay. It's about a change for them. It's about a change in their lives, and a permanent housing resource is attached to that work. And so yes, we have case managers and what we call navigators, of folks that help people secure the documentation that they need to secure a lease. And we begin that important work of connecting them to permanent housing almost from day one.
Your appointment to LASA was supported by Mayor Karen Bass, as well as other supervisors. You were surrounded by a group of very strong women in your appointment. That's a lot of support from a lot of higher-ups. And together, what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I believe the only way we're going to address homelessness effectively is if we do it together as a community. Knowing that I'm supported by such an amazing group of women, female leaders who have been out there for years and years dedicating themselves to community service, volunteerism, and change is amazing. It's inspiring. It's anxiety-provoking. I don't want to let them down at all. And I'm dedicated to doing whatever I can. But certainly having this level of support reminds me that we're all on the same page. We're in this together. We're locking arms, as the mayor has many times said. And I believe we can get it done. I think this is a special moment where we are focused, we're leaning in, and we know we can't stop now. We just can't.
What do you hope your legacy will be? Looking at it, and this is hard to answer, looking at it sort of coming into the position, you must have some thoughts on, if I could end this in any way, many, many years from now, this is how I want people to remember what I did here at LASA.
Right. Well, I want to be able to be a part of a mechanism that significantly reduced street homelessness in Los Angeles. I hesitate saying that I end street homelessness, but I'd like to be a part of the mechanism that makes that possible, that's not a far-off vision. I'd like to be a part of a system that is collaborative, that really does bring the city and county together. Ultimately, I'd like my legacy at LASA to ensure that we are the leaders of a homeless delivery system that's effective, and that folks understand what LASA's role is, and that we are operating in excellence.
It's a lot of work. A lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
You're up for the challenge, though. It was such a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you nothing but the very best of luck in your new job, your new position there at LASA, and hope to see you back here again soon with some positive updates that I know you'll be able to bring.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Until a new poet laureate is appointed, Lynne Thompson continues to promote the power and impact of the word to express the heart of the city. Well, Plato said, "Poetry is nearer to vital truth than history." And I believe my guest today knows that better than anyone. I'm so delighted to be joined again by the LA Poet Laureate, almost emeritus, Lynne Thompson. So nice to have you here.
And it's lovely to be back. Thanks for asking me.
All right, so last time we spoke was truly almost 2 years ago, and you had just, started to get your feet wet into the whole thing, and a lot has happened since then. Have you been able to kind of look in the rearview mirror and get any kind of perspective on how this whole thing has been for you?
I'm still trying to get to that point to really step away from it and have a perspective, but because a new one hasn't been appointed, I'm somewhat still in it. And of course, it was one of the most unusual, if not the most unusual of the 4 that we've had, including myself, because I was appointed at the height of the pandemic.
What?
And so it was a very different type of term than my predecessors. It has taught me how to be flexible, to move quickly, to be patient. So those things I know for sure have been lessons of when you're dealing with a very fraught situation that literally affects the entire community, poets or not. All persons, little children to our seniors, were all affected.
Do you feel that you as a poet changed and your poetry changed, or did you just embrace it more?
I don't think I wrote as much as I would have if I wasn't the poet laureate, because I was trying to figure out events and go to readings and give workshops and so forth.
But you did, and you
did.
wrote something, and I don't know if this is mean of me to even say, but I just remember a few phrases that were centered around a lot of the civil unrest and a lot of the things that were happening.
Right. Even beyond Los Angeles, but certainly including Los Angeles, it is hard, I believe, for many poets, many writers, to ignore the political climate that we're living in, because it is so fraught. And then in the middle of that comes the war in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I did write, I was addressing those issues, as well as we are experiencing just this past weekend in Los Angeles, a complete change in the climate.
Yeah.
Such that we know that Lake Mead that we rely on and the Colorado River are drying up. They're being lowered. We have fires. We have flooding. So it's hard to ignore those issues in poetry. And so some of what I wrote did circle around that.
I had the good fortune of talking to William Merwin. And one of the things that he emphasized is that poetry is meant to be heard. And having that opportunity to say poems out loud or to share other people's poetry, did that even allow you to gain a richer understanding of the meaning and the visceral feelings that poetry evokes?
Absolutely. For any of us, whether we're poets or not, reading it on the page is fine and it's wonderful. And there are all sorts of interesting things happening now with the topography of poetry. But at the end of the day, it's an oral art, and it's so much richer when a voice is behind it. But it taught me just the very basics that don't read too quickly, don't read too slowly, enunciate, because you really want the words to sparkle and to fire something in the person's ear. One thing I did learn as the poet laureate is to put aside my assumptions when I would approach any particular group about where they were vis-a-vis poetry. Some communities felt they knew a great deal about it. Others were very shy about what they knew, and certainly about recitation or writing. One workshop that I did, I want to give a shout out to the Will and Ariel Durant Library in West Hollywood, where I was invited to do a workshop, and they serve with great detail and concern a very large homeless population.
Oh.
So I knew when I went into the workshop that this was a different population than I was used to working with, and realized I shouldn't assume they have pens and papers and computers like so many of the other groups I might have gone into. And it was true. There was a varying skill level in that group, and the literacy for some was a question, but they were so happy to be seen and heard that I don't want to say the poetry didn't matter, but it was almost a vehicle to give them a voice, and it was lovely. It was wonderful.
Did they write?
They actually did write, many of them quite well. I remember one woman in particular asked me to read her poem to the group. And when she gave it to me, I realized that I really couldn't read her handwriting. And I said, oh, this is a problem, because I don't want to make her feel badly. And thank goodness the light bulb went off, and I said, you know, I think your classmates would like to hear it from you. At which point she recited what she had written. And I guess she was a little surprised that I said that to her, and looked to be quite happy about it. And I always wanted to create a welcoming space for poets, non-poets, readers, fans, whatever.
You need to add that to the job description.
I need to add that to the
You
job
do, exactly.
description.
One of the spectacular events that you were able to participate in and create was the Day of Poetry. And I know that you've spoken numerous times about how that made such an impact on you. But for those who may not have had the opportunity to participate or anything, what was that miraculous day, and what did it feel like?
It was the highlight of my tenure. I'm very, very proud of it. The inaugural poet for Anaheim, Grant Heyer, called me, and we started talking about putting something like this together and what would it look like, who could host it. The library was very gracious in saying that we could use the Mark Taper Auditorium. Then we had to find a date, all that entailed, but we ended up with approximately 125 people in attendance. We took an iconic photograph in the second floor rotunda, and following the photograph we went into the auditorium, and 62 poets read, including former poet laureate Luis Rodriguez, and I believe still current youth poet laureate Salome, and I am going to butcher her last name. She's Nigerian American, and she is terrific. The crowd loved her. 2 minutes for every poet except for the two of them. Had a little bit longer. I didn't read, Grant didn't read. This was a gift to the poets and to the city. It represented the diversity of the city, which is what I really, really wanted. And most of all, the poets were so happy to be in community again. So it was nice to have the opportunity to bring them all together.
How does it feel that they all now know you? Because this title will stay with you. It doesn't mean just because the term has ended. This title now is part of who Lynne Thompson is.
That's
what
correct.
Does that mean or feel like?
It's, I told somebody when I was first appointed, and perhaps I said this when we were together before, it's a vindication. Because you may remember that I'm an attorney by training, and walked away from that to pursue poetry, to learn to write the best poem I was capable of writing.
Which is a beautiful intent. And then also, when you pass the baton, what are some of the things that you've sort of collected to share with this new person?
I certainly will tell that person, call me anytime. So many people have been so helpful to me when I call them and said, you know, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And they say, oh, Lynne will help you. It's not a problem. So certainly call on me, but also think broadly, think expansively, think out of the box, be creative. This is a time for you to try something and try to reach as many people. Think about, how do I go about reaching as many people as I possibly can? Because it does make a difference in their life. You can see it in their eyes.
And if anyone wants to see what you are doing currently or in the future,
www.lynnethompson.us, Lynne Thompson, all one word. I'm also on social media. You can find me there. So I try to keep the public aware of what I'm doing.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.